Most people believe that getting lean requires, like, superhuman discipline. They imagine the successfully lean person as someone with total, unwavering control who never gets tempted by a late-night snack. But the smartest strategy actually requires needing less willpower, not more.
Wait, how could needing less willpower possibly work? I mean, laziness is almost universally categorized as the ultimate enemy of fitness and progress, right?
It really sounds counterintuitive at first glance. Welcome to TalkKast. Getting lean is not about forcing yourself to endure moral tests at every single meal. It's really about weaponizing laziness and building a lifestyle where the right choices are simply the easiest ones to make.
That sounds amazing in theory, but how do we actually avoid those evening battles where you just want to eat everything in the kitchen?
Well, you do not want every evening to become a fierce battle between what you intellectually plan to eat and what your tired brain actually wants right now. A genuinely effective fat loss system should completely eliminate those battles, because the truth is you likely already know the basics of nutrition.
Right. I think most people know that vegetables are better than crisps and that walking is good for you. So what is the actual roadblock?
The problem you are facing is not a lack of knowledge, but the simple fact that real life constantly gets in the way. I mean, to truly understand why a lazy system actually works, we first have to accept the rather unglamorous mathematical foundation of fat loss.
Are you talking about the basic energy deficit? Because I know a lot of people try to ignore that part since it sounds so boring.
Exactly. There is simply no honest way to discuss fat loss without starting with the biological reality of the energy deficit. To lose body fat, you absolutely must sustain an energy deficit over time. This means your body has to expend more energy than you take in from your food and drink.
So when that happens, the body is basically forced to use its stored reserves, which means burning body fat.
Yes, that is exactly it. When you maintain that deficit consistently, your body is biologically forced to make up the energy difference. People often deeply dislike this explanation because it sounds incredibly cold, mechanical, and frankly, quite boring.
I can see why. It definitely does not sound as exciting as, like, a special new diet, a secret hormone trick, or a juice cleanse.
It really does not. But it is the undeniable foundation of physics that governs your body. You simply cannot bypass the laws of thermodynamics.
But what about popular diets like low carb or intermittent fasting? I mean, don't they offer a different way to burn fat without just counting calories?
That is precisely why so many popular diets successfully masquerade as magic, when they are really just clever ways to enforce that exact mathematical equation. Low-carbohydrate diets, for example, can be incredibly effective for some people, but they do not work because carbohydrates are inherently evil.
So they just work because you are eliminating a massive chunk of the food you normally eat.
Exactly. By completely eliminating an entire macronutrient group, you naturally end up eating fewer total calories. Intermittent fasting operates on the exact same underlying mechanism. Fasting does not possess magical fat-burning properties simply because you are eating within an 8-hour window.
It just makes it harder to overeat, right? Like, it is harder to eat a surplus of calories in 8 hours compared to 16 hours.
You hit the nail on the head. Even the concept of clean eating works primarily because whole, unprocessed foods are less calorie-dense and more filling, naturally reducing your overall calorie intake. None of these dietary approaches float above the basic energy equation.
So they all just function as tools to help you create that sustained energy deficit.
Yes, they all work only when they successfully help you create an energy deficit that you can actually sustain. And that distinction is incredibly important. A deficit does not mean you have to starve yourself or eat tiny portions out of plastic containers or cut out every single food you enjoy.
Okay, that makes sense. But this brings up a massive contradiction. If the formula is truly as simple as eating fewer calories than you burn, why do so many highly intelligent people still fail repeatedly?
That is the million-dollar question. I know I have sat down on a Sunday, planned out a perfect week of healthy eating, only to completely abandon it and order a massive takeaway by Monday night.
I think everyone listening has done that at least once. Why does that happen so consistently?
What you are describing is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. We can call this the Monday problem. And it perfectly illustrates why relying on pure willpower is a failing strategy. It has a very specific neurobiological explanation rooted in decision fatigue and ego depletion.
Ego depletion. What exactly is happening in the brain on a Sunday evening versus a Monday evening?
Well, when you plan your week on Sunday evening, you are typically well-rested, relaxed, and your prefrontal cortex is fully charged. That is the region of your brain responsible for logical thinking, long-term planning, and impulse control. In that state, Choosing a healthy salmon salad over a pizza feels incredibly easy.
But then Monday actually happens. You sleep poorly, navigate traffic, deal with stress at work. Does all of that drain your brain?
It absolutely does. Every single one of those actions drains a small amount of your cognitive energy. It is essentially like a cognitive bank account. You wake up with a certain budget of decision-making power, and you are constantly spending it throughout the day.
So by the time you get home at 6 in the evening, your account is just completely overdrawn.
Precisely. And when your cognitive bank account is empty, your prefrontal cortex effectively powers down, and your brain defaults to its more primitive reward-seeking centers. So when you walk into your kitchen tired and stressed, cooking that planned salmon dinner suddenly represents a massive cognitive effort.
And I imagine a packet of crisps on the counter or a takeaway app requires zero effort, right? Plus, it gives you an immediate dopamine hit.
Exactly. That is not a failure of knowledge, and it is not a flaw in your character. It is a system problem. The environment beat your willpower because your willpower was biologically exhausted.
Okay, so this leads perfectly into the concept of weaponizing laziness. How do we actually do that if our cognitive bank account is always empty by the end of the day?
Well, if we know we will be exhausted, we have to stop relying on willpower. Weaponizing laziness means accepting human nature rather than fighting a losing battle against it. Humans naturally follow the path of least resistance.
So we basically just choose whatever is easiest and most visible in our immediate environment.
Always. We consistently and predictably choose what is easy, visible, quick, familiar, and convenient. If a packet of chocolate biscuits is sitting prominently on the kitchen counter and the fresh fruit is hidden in a drawer, the biscuits will win almost every single time you walk past them.
That makes sense. So weaponizing laziness means deliberately altering your environment to reduce the friction for good behaviors.
Yes, and dramatically increasing the friction for the behaviors that pull you away from your goal. The concept of friction is the most powerful tool you have in behavioral design.
Can you give me some highly specific, practical examples of what designing this low-friction environment actually looks like in daily life?
Absolutely. The most effective systems are usually built on incredibly mundane, boring habits. The first step is keeping easy protein sources ready in the refrigerator at all times. This means having pre-cooked chicken, large tubs of Greek yogurt, or a bowl of hard-boiled eggs immediately visible.
So when you open the fridge starving, the healthy option is already right there waiting for you.
Exactly. Second, you must shop with a strict pre-written list to survive the psychological layout of the supermarket. Supermarkets are explicitly designed by behavioral psychologists to induce impulse purchases, placing highly palatable foods at the ends of aisles.
I notice that all the time. If you do not have a list, you just fall victim to their design, right?
You do. Third, you must completely remove trigger foods from your immediate environment. If a certain brand of ice cream reliably triggers a binge, you do not keep it in your freezer to test your moral strength. You refuse to bring it into the house.
But what if you still want to enjoy those foods occasionally? Is there a friction strategy for that?
Yes, you employ a friction strategy by only buying single portions instead of large multi-packs. Buying a single small chocolate bar instead of a massive family block is a highly intelligent strategy of environmental design, not a sign of weakness. You are simply creating a physical barrier to overeating.
That is really clever. So it is all about preparing your environment well before the inevitable fatigue sets in.
Precisely. You pack your gym bag the night before and place it directly blocking the front door. You make the right action almost entirely automatic, requiring zero mental debate.
But what about genuine biological hunger? I mean, you can hide the junk food all you want, but if your body is screaming that it is starving, won't you just overeat anyway?
That is a brilliant point. I can hide the biscuits, but if I am genuinely biologically ravenous, I will eventually tear the kitchen apart looking for calories. We have to turn down the biological alarm while still maintaining the energy deficit.
How exactly do we manage that internal biological drive without ruining the calorie deficit?
This is where we must transition from behavioral psychology to nutritional biology, specifically the absolute necessity of protein. Protein is the biological anchor of this entire process. If the mathematical energy deficit dictates whether you lose weight, your protein intake dictates the quality of that weight loss.
Is this where most popular diets go wrong? Like they just focus on eating less total food without caring about what they are actually eating less of?
Exactly. People cut their calories sharply, skip proper meals, consume random low-calorie snack bars, and end up perpetually hungry, physically exhausted, and losing precious muscle tissue. Protein matters so much because it performs several critical biological jobs simultaneously.
What is the first major job that protein does for someone in a calorie deficit?
The first, and arguably most important for daily survival, is creating massive, sustained satiety.
Let us dive really deep into that mechanism. Why does protein make you feel so much fuller than other foods? Like, if I eat sugary cereal, I am starving 2 hours later. But eggs keep me full all morning. What is happening physically in the body?
It comes down to the mechanical breakdown of the food and the resulting hormonal signals. When you consume a refined carbohydrate, like that sugary cereal, the enzymes in your saliva and stomach break down to simple glucose incredibly rapidly.
And that causes a massive spike in your blood sugar, right?
Yes, it floods your bloodstream, causing a sharp spike. In response, your pancreas releases a large amount of insulin to clear that sugar. This rapid clearance often leads to a subsequent crash in your blood sugar levels.
I assume your brain interprets that crash as a sudden need for more energy, which triggers the intense hunger craving.
Exactly. Protein behaves entirely differently. The physical and chemical structure of amino acids is highly complex. Your digestive system has to work significantly harder to dismantle these structures, which physically slows down the process of gastric emptying.
So because the protein remains in your stomach for a much longer period, your stomach stays physically distended.
Yes. And that sustained physical distension sends a continuous mechanical signal to your brain via the vagus nerve, confirming that you are still adequately fed. Protein essentially acts as a biological speed bump in your digestive tract.
That physical speed bump sounds incredibly useful. But are there hormonal benefits to protein as well?
There are. The presence of protein in your digestive system also triggers the release of specific satiety hormones, primarily peptide YY and GLP-1. These hormones travel directly to your brain's appetite center and actively suppress your desire to eat.
Wow. And doesn't protein also burn more calories just through the process of digestion?
Yes, it has a high thermic effect of food, often abbreviated as TEF. Approximately 20 to 30% of the calories in the protein you consume are burned off just through digestion.
So by centering your meals on protein, you suppress your appetite naturally and slightly increase your daily energy expenditure.
Exactly. That makes setting a specific protein target incredibly important. For an active person trying to get lean, a highly effective and practical target is roughly 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight every single day.
To put that into perspective, what would that look like for someone weighing, say, 80 kilograms?
For an 80-kilogram person, that translates to somewhere between 130 and 175 grams of protein daily. The absolute easiest strategy to hit this without doing complex math at every meal is to simply set your protein source first and then build the rest of your plate around it.
So at breakfast, you would anchor it with eggs or Greek yogurt, and at lunch, maybe chicken or tofu.
Exactly. And at dinner, you again center the plate on a quality source like fish, steak, beans, or high-protein dairy. If you find yourself struggling with convenience during a busy workday, utilizing a whey or a plant-based protein shake is a perfectly fine addition.
I feel like a lot of people mistakenly view protein powder as some sort of artificial, magical, muscle-building substance. Is it really just food?
It is not magic at all. It is simply a highly convenient, easily transportable source of protein derived from milk or plants. You make every meal biologically useful by ensuring the protein is the undeniable focal point.
Does eating the same default high-protein meals every day get boring, though? I mean, doesn't that repetition cause people to lose motivation?
A lot of people fear that. But in reality, as we discussed with the Monday problem, constantly seeking variety creates a heavy mental load. Having a default system completely eliminates decision fatigue.
So if you have 2 or 3 go-to lunches that you just rotate, you never have to stand in a shop exhausted trying to negotiate with your cravings.
Precisely. You just effortlessly execute the default plan. Repetition in your diet is not a prison. It is actually freedom from constant mental negotiation. It allows you to save your precious decision-making energy for your life, rather than squandering it all on lunch choices.
Okay, that covers the mathematical foundation and the nutritional anchor perfectly. But if someone is in a calorie deficit and hitting their protein, why is resistance training considered absolutely necessary? Won't they just lose the weight anyway?
They will absolutely lose weight. But there is a massive physiological difference between simply losing weight and actually getting lean. Losing weight simply means the gravitational pull on your body has decreased and the number on the scale goes down.
But getting lean means specifically reducing body fat while keeping as much muscle as possible, right?
Yes. If someone diets aggressively, ignores protein, and only does cardio, they will lose weight. However, they will often end up looking like a smaller, softer, flatter, and weaker version of their former selves. The mirror does not reflect the change they were hoping for.
How do you usually explain the biology behind that muscle loss during a diet?
I think a really helpful way to visualize this is to imagine your body as a large company that is suddenly forced to go through severe budget cuts. The budget cut represents your calorie deficit.
Okay, so in this scenario, your body fat is like the company's savings account.
Exactly. It is stored energy meant to be used during hard times. But your muscle tissue is like the company's highly expensive, energy-demanding research and development department. Muscle costs a lot of calories just to maintain.
So if you are in a deficit and not lifting weights, the body's management just liquidates the expensive muscle to save energy.
Yes. It sees that the muscle is not currently producing anything vital for survival, so it breaks it down. Lifting weights is essentially like sending the CEO daily urgent memos proving that the R&D department is absolutely vital for the company's immediate survival.
That is a phenomenal analogy. So resistance training gives the central nervous system a required biological signal to preserve the tissue.
Exactly. It sends a required biological signal that this contractile tissue is actively in use and must be maintained despite the energy shortage. When you lift weights while in a calorie deficit, you force your body to hold onto the muscle.
Which leaves the body with no choice but to draw the required energy almost exclusively from the stored body fat.
Precisely. You do not need to train like a professional bodybuilder, but you absolutely need some form of progressive resistance training, ideally 3 to 4 times a week. This principle actually connects directly to the concepts discussed in the episode, how to build muscle and lose fat at the same time.
So the primary aim of the weightlifting session isn't to burn as many calories as possible, but just to send that retention signal.
Yes. Fat loss reveals the shape of the body, but resistance training actively builds the shape of the body that is being revealed. The diet handles the fat, and the lifting handles the muscle.
I want to challenge the overall pacing of this approach, though. We are talking about sustainable deficits and building long-term habits. But what about all those influencers selling 30-day ab routines specifically designed to burn away belly fat?
Ah, yes. The aggressive approach.
Right. Why shouldn't someone simply cut their calories as aggressively as possible and perform daily intense cardio or endless sit-ups to drastically speed up the process and target stubborn areas?
That aggressive approach is incredibly common, but it is built entirely on 2 massive biological misconceptions. The first is the enduring myth of spot reduction, and the second is the dangerous illusion of sustainable speed. We have to completely dismantle the idea of spot reduction.
So you literally cannot crunch your belly fat away, even if you feel the burn in your abs.
You cannot. A significant portion of the population genuinely believes that physically training a specific body part will directly burn the fat from that localized area. But human physiology simply does not operate that way.
Training a muscle makes the fibers underneath the skin stronger, but it doesn't pull energy from the fat cells directly above it.
Precisely. When your body needs energy because of the calorie deficit, it just draws it systemically from wherever it wants, regardless of which muscle is currently working. Fat distribution and mobilization are heavily dictated by your genetics, your biological sex, and your age.
Are there specific biological reasons why certain areas like the lower belly or love handles are so stubborn?
Yes. Your fat cells contain different types of receptors, specifically alpha and beta receptors, that control how easily fat is released into the bloodstream to be burned. Areas like the lower abdomen often have a higher density of alpha receptors.
And those alpha receptors make them stubbornly resistant to releasing fat.
Exactly. You might find that you lose fat from your arms, your face, and your chest quite rapidly, while your lower belly seems to hold on to its fat stores until the very end of your diet. You simply cannot force the body to prioritize the belly fat.
So stubborn fat just requires immense patience as your overall body fat percentage trends downward over time.
Yes. And that brings us to the second misconception, the illusion of sustainable speed. When someone decides they lack that patience, and they aggressively slash their calories to bare minimums while doing intense daily cardio, the consequences are severe.
What happens physiologically when someone tries to force the issue like that? Do they just get really hungry?
It is much worse than just standard hunger. When you cut your calories too aggressively, you trigger a massive evolutionary defense mechanism. Your body perceives this sudden energy shortage not as a deliberate diet, but as a literal famine.
So your endocrine system drastically alters your hunger hormones in response.
Yes. Your levels of ghrelin, the hormone that stimulates intense hunger, absolutely skyrocket. Simultaneously, your levels of leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, plummet. Your brain receives a blaring chemical alarm that you are starving.
I imagine this creates a cascade of other negative effects, like impacting your stress levels and sleep.
It absolutely does. Your body's in a state of high physiological stress, so your cortisol levels remain chronically elevated. This severely degrades your sleep quality, making recovery nearly impossible, and your daily energy levels completely crash.
And if your energy crashes, your performance in the gym plummets, meaning you lose that vital muscle retention signal.
Exactly. Furthermore, your body initiates a process called adaptive thermogenesis. To conserve energy, your subconscious daily movement, things like pacing or fidgeting, decreases drastically. Your body systematically shuts down non-essential movements to balance the equation.
And psychologically, doesn't that extreme physical stress eventually lead directly into a massive binge restrict cycle?
It almost always does. You try to be perfect, you restrict heavily for a week, but the accumulated fatigue and skyrocketing ghrelin levels eventually cause your willpower to completely collapse, usually on a Friday night.
Then you overeat massively, feel tremendous guilt, and try to restrict even harder the following week.
Yes, and that rebound completely ruins whatever temporary progress you made. You end up exhausted, metabolically stressed, and right back where you started. A diet that only works when your life is perfectly stress-free and your sleep is flawless is a terrible diet.
Okay, if the extreme approach is guaranteed to fail, we need a clear, actionable blueprint that someone can actually follow. What is step one?
Step one always begins with finding your rough maintenance calorie level. You cannot accurately create a deficit if you do not know your baseline. You pick a realistic daily calorie intake and simply observe your body weight trends over a 2-week period.
If your weight remains stable over those 14 days, you have successfully found your maintenance level.
Correct. Step two is creating a very modest, sustainable deficit of roughly 300 to 500 calories below that maintenance number. This specific deficit aims for a healthy, manageable rate of weight loss, roughly 0.5% to 1% of your total body weight per week.
And step three is setting your daily protein target first, like we discussed, to anchor your appetite.
Yes. Step four is engaging in resistance training 3 to 4 times per week. And step 5, which I believe is the most underrated tool in fitness, is walking daily. You want to slowly build your daily activity up to between 8,000 and 12,000 steps a day.
I really want to highlight why walking is prioritized over other forms of cardio, like high-intensity interval training or running. Why is walking considered the ultimate fat loss tool?
Walking is brilliant because it reliably increases your daily energy expenditure without causing massive central nervous system fatigue or generating heavy joint stress. When you perform high-intensity cardio, your body relies heavily on stored carbohydrates for fast energy.
And that high-intensity effort generates a lot of fatigue that interferes with your weightlifting recovery, right?
Exactly. It also frequently causes a disproportionate spike in your hunger later in the day. Walking, on the other hand, is a low-intensity, steady-state activity. Because the energy demand is low and slow, your body can readily oxidize stored body fat to fuel the movement.
So you can just walk while listening to an audiobook or taking a call and raise your calorie output without ringing those biological alarm bells.
Yes, it is quiet and highly repeatable. Now, a topic that always comes up when people are looking for an edge is supplementation. People always want to know if commercial fat burners or specialized detox teas are necessary to break through a plateau.
Are those fat burners and teas actually doing anything, or are they just marketing distractions?
We need to shut down the idea of fat burners completely and definitively. The vast majority of them are purely marketing distractions designed to separate you from your money. They explicitly promise fat loss without the requirement of patience.
They use all that aggressive language like torching calories and melting stubborn fat, right? But what is the scientific reality?
The scientific reality is that their physiological effects on your metabolic rate are completely negligible. Most of them are essentially just highly overpriced caffeine pills mixed with unproven herbal extracts.
So they just distract people from analyzing the real issues, like their weekend eating habits or lack of sleep?
Precisely. Supplements should never be viewed as the foundation of a fat loss system. However, there are a few specific supplements that actually possess genuine, scientifically backed practical value.
Like protein powder, which we already established is just used for sheer convenience to hit your targets.
Yes. Another highly valuable, extensively researched supplement is creatine monohydrate. Taking a simple dose of 3 to 5 grams of creatine daily helps replenish your cellular ATP stores, which is the primary energy currency of your cells during short, explosive movements.
So supplementing with creatine actually supports your strength and power output in the gym.
Exactly. It helps you lift heavier weights for more repetitions, which directly reinforces that vital muscle retention signal. Finally, caffeine can be used strategically as an effective tool to improve mental alertness and workout performance.
As long as it is used early enough in the day so it doesn't ruin your sleep architecture, right?
Yes, sleep is paramount. If your fat loss plan only seems to work when you are taking a fat burner, it is a fundamentally broken plan. Supplements are strictly optional tools to be layered on top of a solid foundation.
That makes total sense. But how does someone handle the inevitable chaos of daily life, like managing social events, dinners out, or just a moment of weakness without feeling like they ruin the entire system?
You handle those situations by deeply understanding that flexible dieting will always triumph over rigid perfectionism. Rigid diets break so easily because they rely on a highly fragile, binary, pass-or-fail mentality.
So if you view your diet as a strict test of moral purity, one unexpected dinner out turns into a complete psychological collapse.
Yes. Flexible dieting introduces the concept of the 80-20 rule. This principle states that if 80% of your total intake is built from nutrient-dense, whole foods that support your goals, the remaining 20% can easily include a takeaway, some chocolate, or a dessert.
You basically just account for it and plan for it within the mathematical structure of your weekly calorie deficit.
Exactly. It completely removes the unnecessary drama from the process. If you happen to overeat on a Friday evening, you do not wake up on Saturday and attempt to starve yourself or run 10 miles in a panic to burn it off.
You just calmly return to your normal, pre-planned default meals at the very next opportunity.
Yes, you aim for a quick, calm return to your established baseline. I think we can illustrate exactly how this flexible approach plays out over a long timeline by comparing two hypothetical individuals, person A and person B.
Okay, let us say person A takes the extreme, highly aggressive route. What does their routine look like?
Person A relies entirely on pure, unadulterated discipline. They cut their calories aggressively low, permanently ban all their favorite foods, commit to training with heavy weights 6 days a week, and attempt to run 5 miles every morning.
I imagine they perform brilliantly for about 2 weeks, riding that initial wave of motivation.
They do. But then, inevitably, work becomes stressful. Their sleep plummets, they become physically and mentally exhausted, and they eventually miss one single gym session. Because of their rigid mindset, they feel like an absolute failure.
And that leads them to order a massive takeaway, overeat all weekend, and completely collapse under the immense friction they created.
Exactly. Now look at person B, who takes the path of weaponized laziness. They calculate a modest, highly manageable 400-calorie deficit. They eat their default high-protein oats for breakfast every day to eliminate decision fatigue.
They probably go for a quiet walk after dinner instead of doing exhausting cardio and deliberately keep trigger foods out of the house, right?
Yes. And on Saturday night, they go out and genuinely enjoy a meal with their friends without a single ounce of guilt fitting it into their weekly calories. Person B's visual progress might look slightly slower than person A's during those first 2 weeks.
But fast forward 6 months, and person B has successfully and permanently transformed their body because the habits feel normal and effortless.
Exactly. Person B did not succeed because they possessed some superhuman level of willpower. Person B won the game because they intelligently designed a life that required far less willpower to navigate on a daily basis.
As person B navigates those 6 months, though, how should they accurately track their progress without panicking over the daily fluctuations on the bathroom scale?
Tracking must be an entirely dispassionate scientific process. You have to understand that the daily scale weight can and will lie to you in the short term. Your body weight fluctuates wildly based on numerous temporary factors.
So like if you eat a meal slightly higher in sodium, you retain more water. Or if you eat more carbs, your muscles store them as glycogen.
Yes, and that glycogen pulls water into the muscle tissue, increasing your total weight. Even training your legs heavily causes muscular inflammation and water retention. If you judge your progress by a single daily weigh-in, you will drive yourself completely crazy.
So instead of obsessing over the daily number, you only look at the mathematical weekly average.
Exactly. You compare this week's 7-day average to last week's 7-day average. That smooths out the daily noise. But relying solely on the scale is also a mistake because it cannot differentiate between fat, muscle, and water.
So you absolutely must take physical tape measurements of your waist, hips, and chest as well.
Yes. Very often, profound changes in body composition happen at the tape measure weeks before they ever become apparent on the digital scale. Finally, you must take objective progress photos every 2 to 4 weeks using the exact same lighting conditions.
And you just collect all of this data calmly, like a scientist observing an experiment.
Yes. You only make adjustments to your system, like dropping your daily intake by 100 calories, if absolutely nothing has changed across all 3 metrics for 2 to 3 consecutive weeks. There is no sudden panic.
It is just a very small, logical correction to the steering wheel to keep the vehicle on the road.
Exactly. The overarching realization here is that the process of getting lean is widely misunderstood as a grueling test of moral character. In reality, it is simply a process of becoming a much smarter, more strategic designer of your own life and environment.
It is about creating a personalized system that is so frictionless and logical that you can effortlessly stay in the game long enough for the results to show.
Perfectly said. The discipline you really need is not the discipline to aggressively starve yourself. It is simply the discipline to set up your environment properly today, so making the right choice tomorrow is incredibly easy. But before we finish, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you have perfectly weaponized your physical kitchen, but you still follow hundreds of food influencers on social media, or you have fast food delivery apps sending you push notifications at 8 o'clock every night, are you truly setting yourself up for the path of least resistance?
That is incredibly true. Your digital environment triggers your biology just as effectively as your physical one.
Exactly. Take a very close look at your phone tonight and ask yourself if your digital world is fighting your physical goals. Thanks for listening to TalkKast.